Used the internet recently? Feels like a stupid question, doesn't it? You're using it to watch this, of course, but you've almost certainly used it multiple times today. For banking, to check the news, to buy something, to contact a friend. Now, of course, the internet can be a pain. We all waste time there. But it's also incredibly useful. It makes the chores of daily life, finding information, paying bills, so much more convenient. Sometimes it feels almost like magic. Except it's not magic. It's physical infrastructure that involves far more people than you or I can imagine. It's built and maintained by people who go quietly about their business, driving around with their tools or responding to issues over the phone. They keep the internet alive, and they do it so well, so professionally, that it's easy to forget them, to just presume the internet is natural. But it isn't. Without them, it doesn't work. Now, these people, whose names you and I don't know, but who have played a bigger role in our lives this week than any celebrity or politician, are going on strike. A few weeks ago, 30,000 BT engineers and 9,000 call centre workers voted for industrial action. It's the first time they've done so in 35 years. Do they really want to go on strike? Well, judge for yourself. 95.8% of engineers voted for industrial action, on a 74% turnout. 91.5% of call centre workers voted to strike too. Try and find an MP with that kind of mandate. You can't. They don't exist. But why do these people who've not been on strike for 35 years now want to, and in such extraordinary numbers? Well, the answer is simple. BT wants to make them poorer. In March, company management offered employees a pay rise of 4.8%. But with inflation at over 9%, that's a real cut of more than 4%. The offer the company is making to these employees is for them to become 4% poorer. Now, you might think that's because the company is struggling, that these workers shouldn't ask for too much in such difficult times. Only that isn't true. BT recorded £2 billion in profits in the year to March, £2 billion before tax, £1.27 billion after tax. 60% of that, £700 million, was given in dividends to shareholders, the people who own the company's shares. It's privately owned, of course, everything is these days. Now, that wealth was the result of hard work across the organisation, including engineers and call centre workers. But BT bosses rewarded them by making them poorer. Now, 41,500 workers were initially balloted. Each of them could have been earning £5,000 more, and the company still would have made a profit after tax of more than £1 billion. It's quite a lot of money. Shareholder dividends still would have been more than £490 million. That's a great year. But apparently that's too much. Apparently that's not possible, too radical. Who do you think you are? Mother Teresa? Karl Marx? It beggars belief, yet time after time we see the same story in 21st century Britain, of workers coming last. The pundits with the expensive kitchens, haircuts and clothes, well, they call it modernisation, the inevitable price of progress. Progress for who? They could still make a ton of money and workers would get a pay rise, but they want more than that. Here's something else we see a lot. Hypocrisy and greed by those at the top. The person driving this agenda to give call centre workers and engineers a real terms pay cut is CEO Philip Jansen. Now, last year Jansen received a 32% pay rise. That's definitely above inflation. He earned £3.5 million, including bonuses and share awards. £3.5 million. 86 times the average pay in BT, Openreach and EE. Yet he said the company can't afford to pay its staff more. Really? But can afford to give you a 32% pay rise, Mr. Jansen. How convenient. Lucky you. Now, Jansen used to be Chief Operating Officer for the outsourcing giant Sodexo, a company associated with anti-union practices and low pay. In the US, Sodexo has been criticised for a consistent pattern of interfering with workers' rights. Most memorably, they were found to be serving horse meat to British school kids and members of the armed forces in 2013. Remember that? That same year, Jansen became the CEO for WorldPay. 2 years later, when that business floated on the stock market, he reputedly earned £50 million. 50. Now, you'd think that good fortune would mean he'd want to give something back. After all, you can only earn so much. But despite his extraordinary personal wealth, Jansen's objective at BT is simple: increase profits and dividends for shareholders at the cost of BT workers, the people that make those profits possible. And Jansen isn't the only fat cat at the organisation. The group's chief financial officer is also in line for a 25% pay increase this year. He'll be earning 2.2 million. High profits, high dividends, massive pay increases at the top. Perhaps BT management are offering real terms pay cuts to staff because they want to keep customers' bills low. There's a cost of living crisis after all. And yet they're doing the precise opposite. In March, the company told customers of BT Broadband, Landline, BT Mobile, BT Sport, BT TV that bills would increase by 9.3%. That's above inflation. So bills keep up with inflation. We have to charge more because there's just high inflation at the moment. But when it comes to workers, we can't possibly have pay increase in line with inflation. Don't be ridiculous. It sounds like a sick joke, but it's not. And shows how big business looks to exploit high inflation to increase prices and make savings elsewhere, to rip off workers. This is all common sense in rip-off Britain, but the media and most politicians, they don't say anything because they represent the interests of the ultra-rich. They certainly don't represent workers. And that makes sense. After all, people earning an average wage don't fund political campaigns. Millionaires do. And those at the centre of all of this, they really don't earn that much. Call centre workers earn, on average, £22,000 a year, well below the national average, which is around £31,000. Engineers earn £35,000, so they're slightly above the national average. People on these kinds of incomes and these kinds of jobs are the backbone of Britain. They keep things moving. They used to be called key workers during the pandemic, remember those? But for the business elites, whether they can make ends meet in a cost of living crisis, well, that's an afterthought. Actually, that's not entirely true because things are so bad for BT call centre workers, they have food banks at work. Makes sense if you're on £22,000 a year and have a family to feed. EE staff in Tyneside, EE is owned by BT, are offered staples such as pasta, cereal and oats as well as baby food. Looks like a food bank, doesn't it? But don't worry because according to the BT media people, these aren't food banks, they're community pantries. Sounds like something you'd find at Waitrose, because of course it would be embarrassing if a company recording £2 billion profits before tax couldn't pay its staff enough for them to eat properly. Well, the fact is, that's true. And it's not embarrassing, it's a national disgrace. As well as being a senior advisor at Bain Capital, one of the world's leading investment firms and described as notorious for its failure to plough profits back into its businesses, Jansen is also a trustee for the charity Well-Being of Women. He's a male feminist. Fantastic. We need more of those. But might I suggest he starts by considering the well-being of his female staff who earn little more than £20,000 a year and presently get baby food from a workplace food bank. In fact, he can start helping them by agreeing to a pay rise that keeps up with inflation. That's doing a lot more good than being a charity trustee. But maybe it's not about actually helping people, just appearing to be virtuous. We hear that term from the right-wing media all the time, virtue signalling, but they never seem to use it in relation to multi-millionaire CEOs. I wonder why. The story of BT is the story of the Royal Mail. Britain's rail workers are teachers and public sector workers, refuse collectors and those who work in manufacturing. The more you contribute, the more necessary your job is, the more you're taken for granted. Workers at BT have had enough of that and now they're going on strike. Expect more of that in the coming months, a lot more. Because sadly, it's the only way that the likes of Philip Jansen and Britain's greedy corporate fat cats will take note.